everybody, I am going to be telling you a bit about Belgian Pale Ales. So it is said that the first Belgian Pale Ale was brewed in the 1700s in some form or another. And then in the 1800s, it grew more in popularity because this is when refrigeration advancements were occurring. So German lagers actually grew immensely in popularity, and at the same time, so were Czech Pilsners. So in order to stay in the race and keep up with competition, Belgian Pale Ale came along and started to really try to revamp themselves. In my opinion, though, this beer wasn't fully rounded into the beer it is today until World War II. And this was due to British influence of what kind of hops they would use, as well as dry hopping. So that, in my opinion, is what brought this beer to being the really well-rounded, light, sessionable drinking beer that it is today. The ingredients used in a Belgian Pale Ale, for your malt build, it is mainly going to be pale and Pilsner malts. This is going to give you a nice light base, and then obviously they'll go in with other malts. Most commonly used are going to be Crystal, Vienna, or Munich malts. This is really going to add complexity, body, and change the color up a little bit of the beer. They use Belgian yeast in this beer, so you can expect those peppery phenols and fruity esters to come through, but they definitely don't come through the way you would expect. They are a lot less focused on in this beer than in other Belgian styles, in my opinion. In this beer also, hops that are commonly used are going to be Goldings, Saaz, Challenger, or Fuggle. Obviously, you can use other hops, but these are most common for this style. The brewing style and variation of this beer I found to be very interesting because you can do all kinds of different things with beers these days, and this beer seems very versatile to begin with, and like it can fall under a bunch of different categories in a way. So I think if you were wanting to switch things up and really focus in on certain flavors, this beer would be easy to do it with. Some variations you could do are adding extra spice to it. You could add things like clove, anise, coriander, or cardamom perhaps, to really bring up the spicy flavors in there and definitely pull out some more characteristics that you might want. Also, you could add fruit. Obviously, some of these things might change you out of the guidelines, but it would still be similar enough to a Belgian beer to be acceptable, in my opinion. Because fruit is growing in popularity, I feel that there are many different things you could add, such as oranges or pears, or even if you wanted to do something completely different, raspberries, to switch this beer up a little and add more flavor to it. You could also obviously use different types of hops, change when you add them, how you dry hop, stuff like that, and that can really change the bitterness of the beer, the aroma, and even the dryness on the palate. And as far as yeast, it is recommended that you use Belgian yeast, but you can always use other yeasts as well, or alter it. So you can still get those Belgian flavors, but maybe a little something else as well. You can also change the temperature of the yeast. You can keep it a little bit warmer, or maybe cool it off to have the flavors not be as prominent. There are actually a lot of very similar beer styles, in my opinion. It made finding a beer for this project pretty difficult, just because it is so similar to things such as Trappist ales. They just have more hops, it seems, and that kind of is what makes the two styles different. Another is Bière de Garde. In my opinion, it seemed that the Bière de Garde only had more malt flavors associated with it, and that is what made it different. And then last, I felt that strong bitters were also very similar because they follow very similar flavors and aromas, except for obviously it's more bitter, so it's going to be a much higher IBU for that beer. The characteristics of the Belgian Pale Ale I found to be very harmonious. It really does make a well-rounded beer because you have the peppery and spicy phenols and the fruity esters coming from that Belgian yeast. But like I had mentioned before, it is not the focus. It is not as prominent as you would expect in most Belgian beers because it also has the pale malts that are also taking stage, adding sweetness, toasty, nutty, biscuity, even caramelized or honey notes to the beer. And last, the hops, depending on obviously when the dry hopping occurs or if they even decide to do it, the hops are going to add different kinds of spice to go with those phenols, as well as kind of herbal and floral flavors. And in some cases, you'll get citrus, which actually will play off really nicely with the esters that will generally give off kind of an orange, fruity flavor. This beer is, like I had said, well-rounded. All three of those things come together very nicely to create a delicious Belgian Pale Ale. Moving on, some of the tasting notes of the Belgian Pale Ale. The aroma for this beer, it's definitely going to be a lighter smell. It's not going to be a punch in the face of hops or anything like that. You will get some light toasty and biscuity notes from the malts, as well as fruity esters that can give off an orange or pear kind of scent, as well as some spice from phenols and hops coming together and really giving it a little bit of a peppery edge. The appearance of this beer should be anywhere from gold to amber. This beer really shouldn't have haze to it, but it is going to also have a big fluffy head like you would expect from Belgian beer, but it definitely dissipates much faster than you would normally expect from a Belgian beer. The flavor, like I've mentioned, it's very harmonious. It's going to first come on with sweet malt flavors ranging from toasty to biscuity to nutty to even sweeter caramel or honey flavors in there for you. Next, the spicy phenols are going to mix well with the herbal, earthy, and floral flavors of the hops. The hop flavor also, like I mentioned earlier, the citrus will play off of the esters that are going to kind of give you orange flavors, in some cases pear. And then last, you're going to get, definitely at the back end, bitterness and dryness from the hops. This is when they will, in my opinion, be most prominent. But all of these flavors overall will not be overbearing whatsoever. None comes through stronger than another. It kind of just flows through to give you a really nice light beer. In addition, the mouthfeel, because it is such a light beer, is going to just be easy drinking, obviously moderate carbonation. There really shouldn't be much heat to this beer. There could be a little warmth from alcohol, but you really shouldn't be able to taste much of the alcohol or have the effects of alcohol on your tongue. It will leave a bit of a lingering dryness and bitterness from the hops on your tongue. But like I mentioned, it's not going to be overbearing at all, because as far as a pale ale, it definitely has lower IBUs than you would expect. The guidelines for this beer, the color is supposed to range anywhere between gold to amber. The IBUs will range from 20 to 30. And like I had mentioned, I found that interesting because pale ales seem to usually have a higher IBU, and those hops are a lot more prominent. The SRM for this beer can range anywhere between 8 to 14. The ABV of this beer should be 4.8 to 5.5%, which I found really interesting because for the life of me, I could not find a beer that fell within that alcohol range. They were always way higher. So I found that to be very interesting and challenging. The original gravity of the Belgian Pale Ale should be at about 1.048 to 1.054. And then the final gravity should be 1.01 to 1.014. The Belgian Pale Ale is said to be best served in a tulip glass, an oversized wine glass, or even a snifter. Further into this beer, I thought about what things I would really enjoy paired with this beer, and I think things that are like light and refreshing, such as salad or mixed greens of some sort, would be very well paired with this beer, as well as semi-soft cheeses, kind of like a Taleggio cheese, I think would go really well with it. For all the meat eaters out there, apparently grilled meats is very good to pair with this beer. And personally, I think the best pairing for this is spicy foods. Things such as like hot barbecue, curry, and things like that, because it is such a light beer, but it does have a bit of spicy notes to it. And I think it would really cleanse your palate, but also harmonize with the food. So, if you guys are ready, I think it's time to start drinking some beer. Right, and we're back. So a few commercial examples of Belgian Pale Ale are going to be the Esteban Pale Ale. It, in my opinion, seemed truest to the style. Unfortunately, I could not find it anywhere. Next was Saint's Devotion by Lost Abbey. This one was also very close, but unfortunately I could not find it anywhere. Paradisian by Russian River was considered by some to be a good Belgian Pale Ale, but is actually a beer de garde. So that's what I mean by having close to multiple styles. One that I really wish I could have gotten is Karma by Avery Brewing right here in Colorado. It is a taproom rarity, so I was unfortunately not able to get it, but if it ever comes out, I will be trying it now. The Upslope Belgian style pale was available, and I almost got to a keg of it in time to do my project on it, but it just didn't quite work out because it is a limited release as well. Which brought me to the beer I'm going to tell you guys about. It's the Orville Trappist Ale. By some, they would consider it a Belgian Pale Ale, but it definitely is close, but not quite. I also chose this beer because it does have a very interesting story to it. It is said that a widowed countess named Matilda of Tuscany went to the region where the abbey is now, and as she was peering into a pond, she dropped her gold wedding ring. In complete despair, she prayed to God and said, "God, if you can make a miracle happen, in return, I will build an abbey right here." Not a moment later, a small fish brought her ring to the surface in its mouth. And that is actually the same fish and ring that maybe you can see on the label right there. So, thus she created the abbey. Trappist ales are not actually brewed by monks there. Contrary to what many seem to think, it is actually just overseen and blessed by the monks. This is a non-profit, so any of the proceeds that do happen to be left over after making sure the brewery is running, the brewers do get some payment that the monks are fed, does go back to the community to try to help those that are in need. This is actually the only beer they release to the public to drink. And it is one of 11 beers in the world to have the ATP, Authentic Trappist Product label on it. It is given by the International Trappist Association, and out of those 11 beers, only 5 are Belgian. So this is one of the 5 Belgian in the whole world. So I thought that was really interesting. This was influenced by the British. It is dry hopped. Something else that's really interesting is this bottle is formed so that residual yeast won't all just come pouring out. It kind of pools at the end, so if you don't really pour the full beer, the point is that any particulate won't come out as well. Also, something that's very interesting about this beer is it continues fermentation inside the bottle. That has actually caused a little bit of confusion for some, because the ABV of this beer can range from 5.2 to 7.2%, but on the bottle they're required to stamp 6.9% just because it does vary so much. Another really interesting thing is the abbey was allegedly built in 1070 and then was destroyed during the French Revolution. Reconstruction began in 1926, and only a few years later, in 1931, the first Orval Trappist ale was brewed. They boast that they use the same Orval Trappist yeast still today that they did back then. They do suggest that you serve this beer in a chalice. I am not quite that fancy, so I have a nice little glass right here for it. And something else I read about that I thought was actually kind of funny and interesting is Forbes and Independent Magazine wrote a few articles about these beers and how the number of monks are declining, and could this mean the end of these types of beers? And it caused a huge uproar. A bunch of people started buying up their beer, and so Brother Xavier wrote an open letter explaining that there is not a correlation between how much beer is brewed and how many monks are there. That the beer will keep being brewed, and Orval is not concerned about how there are a declining number of monks. So, enough talking. Let's break this bad boy out. Clearly very foamy. Should be interesting. I can hear that it's very, very carbonated. All right, just for time's sake, we'll call that good. Very dark, much darker than I expected. The lighting also kind of is unfortunate for looking at the color. From where I'm sitting, it actually looks like a very pale amber, in my opinion. You can see, though, that there is a ton of carbonation in this beer. You can see it all bubbling from the bottom. Might have to wait a little for the head to go down, so I shall return in just a moment. All right, now that the outrageous head has finally dissipated slightly on this beer, when you take some nice whiffs of it, you can definitely smell the alcohol in there. There's also definitely some earthiness. I get a slight metallic aroma to it, oddly enough. You can tell there's a bit of sweetness from malt in there. And yeah, let's give it a try. Right away, you can taste the malt in it. It's really nice, kind of a toasty, kind of biscuity flavor, almost nutty. I wouldn't quite take it that far, but it is on the brink. There are definitely some fruit notes in there. It almost reminds me of a plum that is in the process of drying into a prune, but not quite there. It has a really nice body to it, very carbonated, like I mentioned, and you can definitely taste the warmth and the bit of a sting from the alcohol. So this one is on the higher end for sure. I would definitely recommend it. It is very good tasting. Like, I feel bad for you guys, you can't taste it right now. I will say I left it out for a little to warm up, and I'm really glad I did. There is a bit of bitterness from hops, but I would say it's not too overbearing. I did feel that this beer would be all acceptable because it is pretty well-rounded. There are no aspects that are overbearing another. Overall, it's really well-rounded beer. So, cheers. I hope everyone enjoyed their beers.